Sunlight cut through the minimalist studio, casting sharp lines across the floor. Jessica Alba sat in the center of the space, her hand resting firmly against the armrest of her chair. She remained still, watching the room. Beside her, Honor Warren shifted her weight constantly. Honor checked her phone, then looked up, her right leg bouncing rhythmically against the floor. The sound of her heels striking the wood echoed in the quiet space. Every movement betrayed a mix of nervous energy and anticipation. This was not a routine visit. The air felt heavier, charged with the weight of an impending transition. Jessica turned her head, caught the eye of the tattoo artist across the room, and offered a single, decisive nod. She turned back to her daughter. "We are ready," Jessica said. The room seemed to narrow around them. The artist moved to the station, pulling a fresh pair of gloves from a box with a sharp snap. Honor stopped her leg from bouncing, took a long breath, and gripped the edge of her seat. The time for waiting had ended. The artist laid out the sterile kit. Metal instruments clinked against the glass tray, a cold, clinical sound that cut through the silence. A small, delicate stencil of a minimalist eye was peeled from its backing and placed carefully on the tray. Jessica watched the artist's precise movements, then turned her full attention to Honor. She reached out, sliding her hand over Honor's to hold it firmly in place. Honor looked at her mother, her gaze softening as the nervous energy began to ebb. Jessica's thumb moved rhythmically, tracing small, steady circles over the back of Honor's knuckles. The motion was slow, intentional, and constant. It was a silent anchor in a room suddenly filled with the smell of antiseptic and the hum of the cooling system. Honor leaned back into the chair, her breathing evening out as she surrendered to the contact. There were no words needed. Jessica leaned forward, her eyes locked on Honor's, offering a wordless promise of presence. The artist wiped the skin clean, the alcohol pad leaving a damp, cooling trail. The final preparation was complete. They were no longer just waiting. They were locked into the moment, tethered together by the simple, firm pressure of their joined hands. The machine hummed to life, a low, persistent buzz that vibrated through the small room. The artist adjusted the grip, the needle hovering just millimeters from the skin. Jessica tightened her fingers around Honor's palm, anchoring her. Then, the needle touched. Honor winced, her shoulders pulling toward her ears as she sucked in a sharp breath. She gripped Jessica's hand so hard her knuckles turned white. The sting was immediate, a sharp, biting sensation that seemed to pulse in time with the machine. Jessica leaned closer, her voice low and steady. "Almost there. Keep breathing." Honor squeezed back, her eyes squeezed shut, trying to find rhythm in the pain. The buzz of the motor filled the air, drowning out the world outside the studio walls. Every time the needle moved, it felt like the weight of the future pressed down on them. They stayed locked in that position, tethered by the needle and the touch. Honor's breathing slowly found a steady cadence, mirroring the mechanical hum. The ink settled into the skin, a permanent marking of a moment they could not reverse. They remained focused, enduring the sting together, waiting for the buzz to cease. The buzzing stopped as abruptly as it had begun. The silence that rushed back into the room felt heavy. The artist reached for a paper towel, dabbing carefully at the skin. As the excess ink cleared, two identical fine-line eyes emerged on their forearms. Honor lifted her arm, holding it beside her mother's. She traced the delicate lines of the tattoo, her fingertip lingering on the ink. It was a mirror image. Jessica looked at the marks and then at Honor. The reality of the upcoming move, the empty room, and the distance hung in the air. Jessica smiled, but her eyes remained sharp, focused on the permanence of the moment. She pulled Honor into a tight, lingering hug. "A permanent reminder," Jessica said, her voice steady against Honor's shoulder. "Wherever you go next year." Honor pulled back just enough to look at the tattoo again. The college transition was no longer a vague idea. It was a looming change marked in ink. They stood there in the quiet studio, staring at their arms. The ink was a tether, a way to keep the connection intact despite the miles that would soon stretch between them. It was a promise of presence, etched into the skin. They stepped before the floor-to-ceiling mirror, their arms pressed side by side. The camera clicked, capturing the identical ink in one sharp, clear frame. Jessica tucked a stray hair behind Honor's ear, lingering for a moment to ensure the ink was perfect. They gathered their things and walked out of the studio, the midday sun hitting them as they stepped into the bustle of the street. The transition felt palpable. The mother-child dynamic was shifting, softening into a partnership of equals. As they reached the car, Honor paused, her hand resting on the door handle. She looked at Jessica, her expression clear and steady. "It feels like you are coming with me," Honor said. Jessica started the engine, the low purr of the car filling the space between them. She looked at her daughter, then shifted into gear. "I am always with you, Honor." They pulled away from the curb, merging into the flow of traffic. The city buildings began to fade into the rearview mirror. Both women sat in the quiet cabin, carrying the same gaze on their skin, ready for the next chapter. The distance ahead no longer felt like an end, but a path they were prepared to walk together.